Tomoe Tsurugi is the overarching villain of Miraculous Ladybug. Not Gabe, not Lila, not Chloe, Tomoe. And you might be thinking, what? That feels a bit strange. She's a side villain at best, smarty pants, at best. And I'll say this to you. Who's the main villain of the Star Wars trilogy? Is it Darth Vader with his endless screen time who spends most of the films chasing down Luke and company? The character who's actually the face of evil for the majority of the story? Or is it the Emperor, the puppet master who turned him to evil in the first place and masterminded everything bad in the franchise? It's the Emperor, by the way, just in case you're wondering. And so in my mind, Gabe is the stand-in for Darth Vader. A well-intentioned man at first who loves his family. He has a wife and son, and yet he finds it all slipping away from him as his wife gets sick. And so he slips into evil deeds and starts trying to find a way to bring her back using the wish granted by the combination of the Ladybug and the Cat Miraculouses. But all the while, we have Tomoe in the background, seemingly pushing him further and further into darkness to fulfill her own agenda, and kind of bullying him along the way, but we'll come back to that. And I think this is a trend that we're going to see continue over the course of the second arc, the second saga of the story. Simply because I think they're definitely planting those seeds. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think she's necessarily going to be the face of the next saga. Ladybug versus Hawkmoth. Marinette versus Lila. That's the story that writes itself, doesn't it? But at the end of the day, I think we are going to view Tomoe as the true villain of the story, even if she isn't the character that the heroes have the most emotional connection to. And I think this makes a lot of sense from both an in-universe perspective, but also from a more meta perspective too. In that I think it's going to make Miraculous a more well-rounded story. First, we need to see how the show frames her. When we first meet Tomoe all the way back in season 3, I think it was, she's nothing more than Kagami's overbearing and domineering mother, who controls her every move and wants to shape her into the perfect successor, so really not all that different to how Gabe had been presented up to that point. Pretty much as a character you wouldn't want to have to deal with in real life, a nightmare parent. Aside from Gabe being rather focused on keeping her on side with him and pushing Adrian to form a connection with Kagami as part of that, there doesn't really seem to be much of a hint of what's to come. There's no massive hints of villainy. I think the only thing that really piqued my interest in her was in Feast, at the end of the episode when it's revealed that the Order of the Guardians and their temple had returned to the world after over 100 years. They showed her reaction shot alongside both Gabe and Natalie's, who were two of the show's main villains at the time, and also Audrey. Don't really know why they showed her. I guess she was relevant back then. And then on top of that, Ikari goes in at the end of the episode, she's trying to convince Kagami that having friends is overrated and they can disappoint you, but Kagami puts her metaphorical foot down and the shot focuses in on the ring she's wearing. And then Tomoe, rather uncharacteristically, relents, despite the fact that she's always going on about how soft parenting is mega cringe. And here is where the status quo sort of stayed for a good long while. She wasn't really featured all that heavily in season 4. I think she appears in like 3 episodes and hardly has any screen time in those. She took a backseat for this part of the story, until we come to season 5, where suddenly, she matters once again for the narrative. She has a huge amount of involvement in the overarching story, and gets a lot of key backstory. In multiplication, she gets akumatized again into Ikari Gozen, but this time, since she multiplies, it's Ikari Dozen. And then at the end, it's revealed that she's in league with Gabe, and they designed these smart rings to sell, which would allow Gabe to give special miraculous powers to the people he akumatizes, to give them a better chance of defeating Catwire and Ladybug. And it never actually works, but it was actually a really good try. And so from here it became clear that, on some level, she'd been working with Gabe from the very beginning, and over the course of season 5 it becomes extremely clear that she has her own goals and agenda that stretch far beyond the scope of what Gabe is after. He goes along with everything she wants, although sometimes she does have to arrive at his house and beat him up a bit, as you do with any long-term business partner. But it's pretty obvious that the major driving force behind all his decision-making is still just Emily, as opposed to this new world BS that Tomoe is spouting. And this all culminates with her being part of his final plan to take over the world and ensure that he's able to raise his own army with which he can get his hands on the 2 Miraculouses he needs to get that wish. And then, in the end, Gabe starts to see sense. He decides that instead of continuing to be a terrible villain, which is the exact thing that Emily wouldn't want, well, he tries to perhaps not redeem himself, but at least atone for even a fraction of what he's done, by giving his own life to restore Natalie and renouncing his role as monarch. And this allows Ladybug to take back all the Miraculouses, except for the butterfly. And in the aftermath of this, we see the stage set for more villainy. Remember, in the final act of the story, Gabe and Tomoe were masterminding pretty much everything from behind the scenes using that laptop. And this laptop was in turn swiped by Lila, who used it to infiltrate Gabe's mansion during the course of the battle between Monarch and Lady Noir, or whatever name Marinette was using at the time. And this in turn let her snatch away the butterfly Miraculous, setting her up to be the next Hawkmoth in the next season. And we already knew that there was going to be a new Hawkmoth at some point in the future, and very early on, it became clear that part of her arc was going to revolve around that being her story arc. She got tangled up with Gabe's schemes and became one of the secondary antagonists of the show during season 4 and 5, after years of being a more minor villain. But now she's being called up to the big leagues. It makes sense, but does it make sense for her to be a complete and utter main antagonist? Over all of this arc, as in completely and utterly, I'm not sure. I mean, we don't know heaps about her, but to me it seems clear that she's a total narcissist who feels like she deserves to have the best of everything. She wants to be praised and adored by all and have attention, more attention than anybody else, and she's willing to do anything to get it. And also she hates anybody who stands up to her or stands in her way or calls out her BS. So currently her major nemesis is a combination of Ladybug and Marinette. So by far she hates them the most. Although I don't think she knows at this point that they're the same person. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think so though. At least not yet. Guarantee she learns it at some point. But I do have to wonder, is that really enough for her character to make her mark as the main antagonist? I mean, yes, there's likely more for her character and backstory that is going to be revealed over the course of the story. But the main story beats of season upon season, revolving completely around her trying and failing every episode to ruin Marinette's life or the life of another classmate who she realistically also hates, after she got humiliated at the end of last season. But is that enough to anchor a season? She needs to want to get her hands on the other Miraculouses, otherwise her character is going to become very dull in one note. But unlike a lot of other villains in the story, Gabe, Tomoe, Chloe, at times even Felix back when he was more villainous, Lila/Cerise doesn't seem to be filthy rich. Her lair is some dingy ass dungeon. If she's going to try to take on the whole group of heroes, surely she'll need some actual support. And so that's kind of the meta reason for her to get involved with somebody like Tomoe, somebody who has resources and access to a bunch of tech and money. Somebody who may be willing to work with somebody like Lila. After all, Lila did manage to betray Chloe Game of Thrones style after she got what she wanted from her, and she did manage to get the drop on Tomoe and Gabe, stealing the laptop from them, and then she managed to use it to steal the butterfly Miraculous. It's a pretty impressive resume. And on top of that, it's also clear that Tomoe herself would have motive too. After all, she has some sort of need for the Miraculouses as well. Otherwise, why the hell would she bother helping Gabe out in the first place and investing all that time into the ring's technology and whatnot? Has it ever actually been spelled out what she's after? I presume a wish of some kind. I don't think it's ever been said though. But I presume it will be said in the next couple of seasons, likely even next season. She also seems to be the number one shipper for Adrian and Kagami, so we'll see how that goes. But she's kind of mysterious as it is. But one thing's for certain, and that is that she's probably want to get the Miraculouses. Gabe being defeated shouldn't kill that story thread off. It's clear that she wanted a slice of the pie all of her own. So I think at some point, we are going to see these two villains link up. And for all we know, this has already happened, because at the end of season 5, we had Lila, or Cerise now I guess, just chilling in her lair before she turns around and sees something. And honestly, I don't recall if we've ever actually had any confirmation as to what she saw, as of right now at least, but I guess it could be anything. Her long-lost father returned from getting milk or cigarettes. Nuru on steroids, angry that once again he's stuck with somebody who sucks and is ready to whoop some serious ass to escape. Or maybe it's just Tomoe. Or somebody she sent, maybe a robot of some kind, I don't know. She's rich, and Max for some reason has made his AI program, that probably would have been worth like billions of dollars, open source, so she can just make a robot anytime and inject that personality inside. You could make a genuine battle bot, She did make a full-on Star Wars style space cruiser, an intelligent one at that, she'll be fine. And on top of that, surely there's some sort of GPS tracker or software in that device that Lila stole. There's no way she's going to get away with pinching that, right? Especially since Tomoe has... Did she take control of Gabe's assets or her business assets? Is that what she said at the end of last season? Something like that. I think she mentioned finishing his work or something along those lines. So what was his work? Oh, that's right, it was getting those damn Miraculouses. And since Lila/Cerise has the butterfly, she's going to have to play nice, at least for now. On top of that, I am expecting to get a bit more information about how she sort of puppet mastered this whole thing. I mean, isn't she the one who first got Gabe in contact with Natalie in the first place? Which in turn let them find the Miraculouses. And on top of that, Kagami's a senti person, right? I feel like the story is going to delve a bit deeper into that side of things too. And Tomoe's tied up with all that. And so in the end, I can't help but feel that the show's aiming to build to this big puppet master reveal, where it's revealed that from the very beginning of the story, it was Tomoe that was pulling Gabe's strings. And I think we'll see her do this to Lila in real time. Start to manipulate her, pull at her strings. And of course, Lila is almost certainly going to try to betray her at some point. That's her MO. But for the time being, I think they're going to end up as unlikely allies. And whilst I think there is a good chance that Tomoe gets defeated earlier than Lila in the grand scheme of things, I think that when we look back at the completed arcs of the show after it's all said and done, you know, this arc that we just finished with Gabe and then the next one that's upcoming with Lila as Hawkmoth, I think ultimately the most important villain, as in the big overarching baddie that puts the pieces into place, it's going to be Tomoe. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun piecing it all together. I think they could do a really interesting sort of mysterious storyline where the audience has to figure things out as it goes along. And it does feel like the previous seasons have been building up Kagami's screen time with this sort of thing in mind, as obviously she's going to be important to it all. And so yeah, perhaps a bit rambling, but I've said what I wanted to say. And so with all that being said, this is the end of the video, and these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of what I've had to say? Do you agree with me, or do you think I need to wear a tinfoil hat for the rest of my life? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.